The worst day of my life didn't happen in a hospital room or at work. It happened in my parents' living room on a Tuesday afternoon when I was called to a meeting I didn't know was already decided. I remember walking in and seeing the chairs arranged in a semicircle. My brother Caleb stood instead of sitting. That was the first sign something was wrong. My parents sat across from each other, my mother's hands folded in her lap, my father staring at the coffee table like it held answers. Nobody looked at me when I entered. Caleb spoke first, his voice calm and measured. "Elena, we need to talk about what's best for you right now." I didn't say anything. Waited. "You're not stable enough to be involved in major decisions," he continued, as if reading from a script he'd rehearsed. "We think it's better if I handle things for a while. Just until you're better." Better than what? I wanted to ask. Better than grieving. Better than being alive. My mother stared at her hands. My father nodded once, a slow, deliberate movement that sealed something. Papers slid across the coffee table. Documents I'd never seen, decisions already made, my signature required on agreements I hadn't read. I opened my mouth, but my voice didn't fit the room anymore. "My name is Elena Wright." And in that moment, grief became evidence against me. The chapter ends with my father signing something without looking up, sealing a decision that erased me while I was still standing there. They didn't raise their voices. That was the cruelty of it. Everything was wrapped in concern, tied up with care, presented as protection. Caleb kept using phrases like, "for now," and "just until she's better." Better than what? Better than inconvenient grief. Better than asking difficult questions. My mother finally spoke, her voice soft. "You should rest, Elena. Stress isn't good for you right now." Her hand hovered near my shoulder but never touched it. She was afraid of me, I realized. Or afraid of what my pain might demand from her. My father said nothing at all. Silence, I learned, was his agreement. His permission. His way of letting Caleb become the decision-maker without having to decide it himself. I tried to explain that I wasn't incapable. I was grieving, yes, but I wasn't broken. Caleb cut in smoothly, reminding them of the week I forgot to return a call, the night I left dinner early because I couldn't breathe in that room. Ordinary moments twisted into proof of instability. "See," he said gently, like he was sad about it. "This is what I mean." I realized then this wasn't about my well-being. It was about control. It was about Caleb wanting to matter more than I did, wanting to be the one who fixed things, the one everyone relied on. The chapter ends with Caleb offering to handle everything, and my parents letting him, relieved to no longer have to ask me anything, to no longer have to see my grief reflected back at them. No one followed me when I left the living room. The door shut behind me with a soft click that felt final and absolute. Outside, I sat in my car in the driveway and stared at the steering wheel until my hand stopped shaking. I gripped it so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to go back inside and demand they listen to me. But I knew it wouldn't matter. The decision was already made. That night no one called to check on me. No message asking if I was okay. No "are you home safe?" text. Instead, I saw photos in the family group chat. Dinner at my parents' house, everyone laughing around the table. I wasn't invited, but I was discussed. I could feel it in the way the messages stopped when I read them. A cousin texted me privately, "They're just worried about you." That's when it hit me. My absence made things easier. Without me there, my family didn't have to sit with the uncomfortable reality of my pain. They could pretend everything was fine. They could move forward. I replayed the living room scene again and again that night, lying in bed. The way Caleb stood so confidently. The way my father signed without hesitation. The way my mother avoided my eyes because looking at me meant acknowledging what she was allowing. The chapter ends with me realizing this wasn't temporary. This was a quiet restructuring of my place in the family. I was no longer a voice. I was a problem that had been solved. Within days, Caleb became the official voice of our family when it came to anything involving me. Relatives stopped asking how I was doing and started asking how he thought I was doing. "How's Elena doing?" They'd ask him at family events. Not me. Never me directly anymore. He controlled the updates. He controlled the narrative. He decided what people knew about my condition, my life, my thoughts. At a family lunch I wasn't invited to, I found out through an aunt who let it slip, then immediately apologized, like telling me the truth was the real mistake. Caleb told everyone I needed space. That I was overwhelmed. That it was better this way. That he was managing the situation. I didn't confront anyone. Just listened. I let people tell me what my brother had said about me, and I memorized every word. The more Caleb talked, the more comfortable everyone became letting him decide things. He framed himself as the responsible one, the steady presence, the strong shoulder holding everything together. Me, I became the fragile one, the unpredictable one, the liability. He never said it directly. He didn't have to. It was in the concerned tone of his voice when he mentioned my episode. It was in the way he'd pause, like he was carefully choosing words I could understand. The chapter ends with me understanding that every day I stayed silent. His version of me became more real to them than I actually was. He was writing my story, and everyone believed him because he spoke with such certainty. I wasn't banned from family events. I was gently excluded. Invitations stopped arriving. Decisions were made, already handled. When I showed up unannounced to my parents' house one weekend, conversations shifted mid-sentence. My mother started using careful language around me, like I might break if she said the wrong thing. My father avoided any topic that involved plans or money or future decisions. Caleb sat confidently at the center of everything, relaxed, smiling, comfortable in his new role. No one argued with him anymore. I realized something unsettling. They preferred him this way. A single voice was easier than listening to me grieve, question, or disagree. It was simpler to have one person making decisions than to navigate the complexity of my pain. That night I went home and wrote everything down. Conversations. Who said what? Who stayed quiet? Who defended him? Who looked away? I created a document on my computer, password protected. I called it Timeline. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I was beginning to understand that I needed to see the pattern clearly if I was ever going to prove what was happening. The chapter ends with me deciding I wouldn't fight to be heard anymore. I would wait. I would watch. I would collect evidence until I became undeniable. Silence changed how people behaved around me. Once I stopped defending myself, something shifted. Caleb grew bolder. He corrected relatives openly when they asked me questions directly. "I'll answer that," he'd say smoothly, like it was the most natural thing. Like my voice didn't belong anymore. I watched my parents let it happen. Not because they were cruel, but because it was easier than confronting what they'd allowed. Easier than admitting they'd made a mistake. I stopped interrupting. Stopped defending myself. I nodded when Caleb spoke over me. I thanked them for their concern. I played the role they'd assigned me. Inside, though, I was alert, watching, cataloging. I noticed how often Caleb contradicted himself. How his stories shifted depending on who he spoke to. How he exaggerated my episodes, adding details that didn't happen, removing context that made me look better. I noticed that when he was caught in a small lie, he'd laugh it off and move on. Everyone laughed with him. No one asked for clarification. The chapter ends with me realizing he believed his own authority too much. He was so convinced of his righteousness that he'd stopped being careful. And arrogance like that always eventually exposes itself. I arrived at my parents' house early one afternoon. I had a key. I was still their daughter technically. Voices carried from the dining room. My name floated through the doorway like a ghost. Caleb was explaining something again. Why I shouldn't be included in an upcoming decision. A financial decision, from what I could gather. My father hesitated this time. For the first time he actually hesitated. My mother didn't. She agreed immediately. I stayed still in the hallway, not breathing, not moving. Just listening. Caleb said, "She wouldn't understand anyway." That sentence settled something in me. Cold. Clear. Final. This wasn't protection. This wasn't concern. This was erasure. This was him deciding I was too stupid, too broken, too unstable to understand my own life. When I finally entered the room, the conversation stopped abruptly. Too abruptly. The guilty silence of people caught doing something they know is wrong. My father cleared his throat. My mother smiled at me like I was a child. Caleb didn't flinch. I smiled back and asked what they were discussing. Nothing important, Caleb said. Just some financial stuff you don't need to worry about. The chapter ends with me smiling politely, knowing I just heard the truth they never planned to give me. And knowing that everything was about to change. Became agreeable. That surprised them. Caleb especially. I thanked him for helping. I told my parents I trusted their judgment. I played the role they assigned me perfectly. The grateful daughter. The one who knew she needed to step back. The one who understood she wasn't capable right now. They relaxed. Shoulders dropped. Caleb smiled more. My parents stopped looking guilty. That's when people talk freely. That's when they stop being careful. I learned about documents I'd never seen. Financial accounts managed without my knowledge. Promises made in my name. Decisions justified using my condition that had been made months before anyone spoke to me about it. I didn't confront anyone. Collected. I documented. I compared what Caleb said publicly to what he did privately. The discrepancies were small at first, but they stacked. I found old emails forwarded between my parents and Caleb about managing the situation. I discovered decisions that had been made unanimously, when I was never even asked. I read my own name being discussed like I wasn't a person, like I was a problem to be solved. Every piece went into my timeline. The chapter ends with me realizing that silence wasn't weakness. It was camouflage. It was the most powerful weapon I had. Caleb slipped up at a family gathering. He claimed something had been decided unanimously. An uncle questioned him. Another relative remembered it differently. The room went quiet for half a second. That tiny pause where everyone realized something didn't add up. Caleb laughed it off. Changed the subject smoothly. Made a joke about his memory. Got everyone talking about something else. But I saw it. The first flicker of doubt in my uncle's eyes. The way my aunt exchanged a look with her husband. After that, people started asking questions quietly. Not to me directly, but around me. When did that happen? Are you sure? I thought we decided something else. The chapter ends with me understanding that credibility, once cracked, never fully seals again. Caleb had built his authority on the assumption that no one would question him. Now that assumption was broken. I started noticing who benefited most from my exclusion. Caleb had access now. Authority. Praise for being so responsible, so steady. My parents deferred to him without discussion. They didn't even look at each other anymore before agreeing with him. I reviewed old messages, old emails, old texts. Things that didn't add up. Decisions justified using my condition, long before anyone spoke to me about it. Plans made without my input that affected my life directly. This wasn't reactive. It wasn't him trying to help and things spiraling. It was gradual, strategic, intentional. When had it started? I traced back through the timeline. 6 months before the living room meeting, Caleb had started positioning himself. Small things at first. Let me handle this. You shouldn't worry about that. I'll take care of it. My parents had let him. And once they started letting him, it became easier and easier to keep letting him. The chapter ends with me accepting something painful. My family didn't just fail me once in that living room. They chose convenience over truth repeatedly. Every single time it would have cost them something to speak up. An aunt pulled me aside one evening at a family dinner. My mother's sister. She hesitated before speaking, like she was crossing an invisible line and wasn't sure she should. She told me she'd been uncomfortable for a while. That Caleb controlled too much. That she didn't like how I was spoken about when I wasn't present. The casual dismissiveness. The way they talked about my issues like I wasn't a real person. She apologized. for staying quiet, for not saying something sooner. Thanked her. And I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough that she understood this was bigger than she'd realized. The chapter ends with me realizing that silence had protected my family too, from having to confront what they were doing, from having to take responsibility. Now that someone had broken that silence, it was getting harder for them to pretend. Two relatives compared notes. I didn't orchestrate it. They just happened to be talking about a family decision and realized Caleb had told them different versions of the same event. To one cousin, he'd said I was too unstable to be included. To an uncle, he'd said I didn't want to be involved. To my parents, he'd said both things at different times. I didn't point it out. I let them reach the conclusion themselves. When they asked me about it, I simply told them the truth. I was never asked for any of it. Questions followed. Small ones, careful ones, but they were questions. Caleb noticed the shift. He grew defensive, less smooth. He started calling more meetings, sending longer messages, repeating himself. Authority always gets louder when it's threatened. He corrected people mid-sentence, finished their thoughts for them, claimed decisions had already been agreed on again, insisted he'd told everyone, even when people contradicted him. The chapter ends with him watching me closely for the first time, realizing I wasn't confused anymore. I was waiting. And he didn't know what I was waiting for. Caleb sensed it before anyone said it out loud. The questions were softer now, but they landed heavier. He started calling more meetings, sending longer explanations, repeating himself. When authority is threatened, it gets louder. He corrected people mid-sentence, finished their thoughts for them, claimed decisions had been agreed on long before anyone actually agreed to them. My parents noticed. I could see it in the way my father paused before nodding now, in how my mother asked follow-up questions she used to avoid. They were starting to see the cracks in his story. He stayed calm, almost distant. I spoke only when asked direct questions. I answered simply, without elaboration. I didn't fill the silence with my voice. That unnerved him more than anger ever would. He'd become accustomed to me being quiet and broken. Now I was quiet and clear. There was a difference he couldn't quite name but could definitely feel. The chapter ends with Caleb watching me across the room during a family dinner, realizing for the first time that I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't suffering silently. I was waiting for something specific. And it terrified him. An old email resurfaced during a casual conversation. My name was on it. My consent clearly stated. My signature. Caleb froze for half a second too long before dismissing it as outdated. But it wasn't. Another relative mentioned a timeline that didn't match his story. Then another. Small inconsistencies stacked quietly. No accusations, just confusion. Wait, when did that happen? I thought we decided something different. Didn't Elena sign off on this? Caleb tried to smooth it over, but his voice lost its rhythm. He kept explaining things no one asked about. He provided details no one requested. He was trying to outrun the questions. I said nothing. I let the documents do what emotions never could. I let the evidence speak. The chapter ends with my father asking quietly, "Why didn't we know about this?" And Caleb not answering immediately. The first time he hadn't had a ready response. The first time his authority wobbled visibly in front of everyone. It didn't happen dramatically. No shouting. No confrontation. Just subtle shifts. Conversations happened behind closed doors. Invitations were sent selectively. Some family members stopped looping Caleb into everything. Others doubled down on defending him, not realizing they were defending the indefensible. He accused me quietly of manipulating perceptions, of playing the long game. I didn't deny it. I didn't confirm it either. "I'm just telling the truth," I said. "You can decide what that means." My parents were stuck in the middle, torn between what they'd allowed and what they were starting to see clearly. They had to reconcile the brother they loved with the person he'd become. The chapter ends with a family dinner where no one touched their food, and everyone knew something unavoidable was coming. The air was thick with it. The unspoken reckoning that couldn't be postponed much longer. The days between the family dinner and the confrontation were the longest of my life. I didn't sleep much. I'd lie awake replaying conversations, checking my timeline, making sure every date was correct, every fact was solid. I couldn't afford a mistake. One inconsistency and Caleb could twist it into proof that I was the unreliable one. My hands shook sometimes. Not from fear, from the weight of holding everything in. From knowing what was coming and having to act like I didn't. I saw Caleb at a grocery store 3 days before everything unraveled. He didn't see me. He was on his phone, talking confidently about some decision he'd made. He had no idea his world was about to collapse. Part of me almost felt sorry for him. He'd built his authority on lies, and lies are fragile things. They only work if no one checks the foundation. I checked the foundation every single day. That night I printed everything. Every email, every message, every contradiction. I organized it all in a folder, labeled it carefully. I wasn't going to wave it around or use it as a weapon, but I'd have it if I needed it. The chapter ends with me realizing I was ready. Everything I'd been waiting for was about to happen, and I was absolutely certain of the truth. We gathered in the same living room where my worth had first been decided. The chairs weren't arranged this time. No script, no predetermined outcome. Questions came slowly, then faster. What exactly happened with that account? When did you make that decision? Why didn't Elena know about this? Caleb interrupted. Was asked not to. He laughed it off, then stopped laughing when no one joined him. I spoke only when asked. Clear. Specific. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. No emotion. Just timelines and facts. Just documentation and dates. Just the version of events that matched the evidence. When he contradicted himself, I didn't point it out. I just waited for someone else to notice. And they did. The chapter ends with the room going silent again, but this time the silence wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at him. And he could feel the difference. Caleb snapped when my father asked for clarification on a specific decision. His voice rose. His words rushed. He blamed stress. He blamed misunderstanding. He blamed circumstances. Then he blamed me. She's been manipulating this whole thing, he said. She's been quiet on purpose to make me look bad. That was the mistake. The room stiffened. My mother looked at him like she was seeing a stranger. My father's expression hardened. I stayed still. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. If that's true, my father said quietly, then you should have documented it. Instead of just saying it now. Caleb had no documents. He had no evidence. He had nothing but his word, and his word had become worthless. The chapter ends with Caleb realizing he was defending himself now, and no one was stepping in to help. The unified front had shattered. He was alone. The apologies came quickly. From my parents first. Carefully worded. Heavy with regret but light on responsibility. We should have listened to you, my mother said. We made a mistake, my father added. I accepted them without embracing them. Thank you, I said. That was all. Caleb didn't apologize. He explained. Justified. Minimized. I was trying to help, he said. I was doing what I thought was best. But you didn't ask her, my father replied. You decided for her. That told everyone what they needed to know. The chapter ends with my father quietly asking Caleb to step back from decisions. For now. Not forever. But for now. And in that pause there was everything. No announcement was made. No public punishment declared. Caleb just stopped being consulted. Messages went unanswered. Plans were discussed without him. He wasn't disinvited. He just wasn't invited. He noticed. I noticed something else. How peaceful the house felt without his constant direction. Without someone always speaking for me. Without having to be silent to survive. I started being asked my opinion again. On small things at first. Then bigger things. What do you think, Elena? It felt strange hearing my name again, like I was being called back into existence. The chapter ends with Caleb standing alone in a room full of people, experiencing the silence he once used against me, understanding finally what he'd done. 3 weeks after Caleb stepped back, something shifted in how my parents looked at me. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like waking up from a dream and remembering what's real. My mother started asking me questions like I was a person again. Real questions. Not the careful, gentle ones you ask someone fragile. Actual questions that assumed I could think and decide and know things. My father apologized again, but this time differently. "We should have trusted you from the beginning," he said. And I could hear the weight of it. Not just regret for what happened, but understanding of why it happened. They'd been so afraid of my grief that they'd handed it to Caleb to manage. They'd traded one daughter's pain for the comfort of not having to face it. I didn't forgive them in that moment. But I began to understand them. Caleb noticed the shift too. He started trying to reclaim some authority, making suggestions, offering to help with things. My father thanked him but handled it himself. My mother smiled politely and said she had it handled. He wasn't needed anymore. And he knew it. That's when real consequences began. Not punishment but irrelevance. The quiet death of someone's importance. The chapter ends with me understanding that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply being undeniable. Not through anger or confrontation, but through becoming too real to ignore. I didn't demand authority. I didn't storm back into every decision. I earned trust again through clarity and consistency. When I spoke, people listened. When I paused, they waited. When I was uncertain, I said so. When I was sure, I said that too. Felt unfamiliar but right. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was just being myself. And that turned out to be enough. The chapter ends with me realizing I wasn't reclaiming power. I was reclaiming presence. I was becoming real again to the people who'd forgotten I was human. Some relationships stayed distant. Some apologies never came. Caleb never fully acknowledged what he'd done. He moved past it, and my parents let him because staying angry was harder than moving forward. I stopped chasing them. Stopped waiting for the apology that would make it okay. Stopped needing them to understand. Healing didn't mean restoring everything to how it was before. It meant choosing what deserved space in my life now. The chapter ends with me setting boundaries without explaining them. Without justifying them. Without needing permission. There was no final confrontation. No dramatic victory where I got to say, "I told you so." Just calm. Caleb avoided me now. Not out of guilt, but because he no longer controlled the narrative. Being around me meant confronting his own actions, and he wasn't ready for that. I didn't need him to be. I didn't need anything from him anymore. The chapter ends with me realizing peace was the only ending I needed. Not revenge. Not vindication. Just the quiet knowledge that I was whole again. Caleb texted me. That was surprising enough that I almost didn't respond. "Can we talk?" the message said. Simple. No explanation. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop halfway between our places. Neutral ground. He looked smaller than I remembered. Tired. Like carrying the lie had exhausted him more than I realized. "I know what I did," he said. No preamble. No justification. I know I took control. I know I lied about some things. I know I made you invisible. I didn't respond. I let him continue. I told myself I was helping. I told myself you couldn't handle it. But the truth is, I liked being the one in charge. I liked mattering more than you did. He looked at me. Really looked at me. Like he was seeing me for the first time in months. "I'm sorry, Elena. I'm genuinely sorry. And I know that doesn't fix anything. But I needed you to hear it." I believed him. Not because he seemed sorry, but because he wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just stating a fact. "I accept your apology," I said. "But I don't know if I can trust you again." He nodded. Like he'd expected exactly that answer. The chapter ends with us sitting in silence. Two people who used to be close, now separated by what he'd done. And him finally understanding that some bridges, once burned, don't get rebuilt. Weeks later, Caleb admitted privately that he might have gone too far. It wasn't remorse. It was defeat. I acknowledged it and moved on. I hope you learn from this, I said. And I meant it, but I wasn't waiting around to see if he did. The chapter ends with him understanding I didn't need his confession. I didn't need his redemption. I needed him to understand what he'd done, and maybe he finally did. But it didn't change anything for me anymore. I stood again in my parents' living room. Same walls, same furniture, different energy. No one spoke for me. No one interrupted me. No one made decisions about my life without asking. My mother asked me how I was, then actually listened to the answer. My father deferred to me on decisions that affected me. Like it was obvious. Like it had always been this way. The chapter ends with respect replacing pity. With presence replacing the absence. With the truth finally matching the words. My worth was never decided by my brother. It was revealed by how hard he tried to control it. By how much energy he spent convincing everyone I was less than I was. By how desperately he needed me to be broken. That said everything about him. Nothing about me. I learned that silence can be power. That documentation is truth. That patience isn't weakness, it's strategy. I learned that family isn't always safe, but healing is always possible. Not with them, but in myself. I learned that revenge doesn't mean destruction. It means simply refusing to be destroyed. It means standing in your own truth until everyone else has no choice but to see it too. The chapter ends with me whole, steady, seen, and finally free. Not because they acknowledged me, but because I'd already acknowledged myself. And that was always enough.